Most people are wasting 20 years of free food without even realizing it. Each season, they start over and destroy everything they have built. Their garden operates like a factory that never creates an asset. But there is a system that feeds you for decades without this cycle. The problem is that you were taught to think only one season ahead, and every year you wait costs you another lost harvest. The strangest thing is that you need to start in winter, not spring. This is completely contrary to everything you have heard about gardening. Today, you will see a precise system of 7 trees and 3 levels. And if you understand this principle, you will never plant the same way again. Traditional gardening is an industrial model applied to the backyard. You plant neat rows of annual vegetables that live for one season, produce, and die. Each spring, the cycle begins anew with the purchase of seeds, soil preparation, and planting. Research from the University of California reveals the shocking truth. Up to 70% of all energy in a traditional garden is spent on annual soil recultivation. You spend more effort preparing the land than you benefit from the harvest. Contrast this with the agroforestry systems of 18th century Europe. The gardens lasted for decades without being replanted, fed generations, and required minimal annual labor. The system was built once and worked for the entire life of the owner. The modern gardener is locked in a cycle of dependence on external resources. Every year, he buys seeds, fertilizers, and plant protection products. Every fall, he removes dead plants and prepares to repeat the cycle again. This is not gardening. This is calendar design. You plan from spring to fall, from planting to harvesting. But you never think about creating a permanent system. Your vegetable garden never becomes an asset that works for you. The indigenous peoples of North America made decisions by thinking 7 generations ahead. Every action was assessed through the lens of how it would affect their children's children 150 years from now. This philosophy created sustainable ecosystems that fed the tribes for centuries. The modern gardener thinks in terms of one season. He buys a bag of seeds in March, thinking about what he will eat in August. The maximum planting horizon is 6 months from planting to harvest. A food forest requires a fundamental shift in thinking from a calendar-based to an intergenerational approach. A tree planted today will bear fruit for 20 years, feeding your children and grandchildren. This is an investment not just for a season, but for decades. Imagine the apple tree planted by your grandfather in 1930. Today, it still bears fruit, although the man who planted it is long gone. One decision made almost a century ago still feeds a family. Moving from annual to multi-year thinking means moving from consumer to ecosystem creator. Instead of buying temporary solutions every year, you build a permanent infrastructure of abundance. A study by the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization reveals a startling truth. Agroforestry systems produce 40% more food per unit area compared to monocultures. Vertical plant stacking is superior to horizontal planting in all respects. A food forest works like a natural ecosystem, with each layer occupying its own niche. Tall trees catch the sun from above. Medium-sized plants use diffused light, and shrubs thrive in partial shade. Not a single square meter of land is idle. Once created, the system requires minimal intervention. Instead of annual digging, sowing, and weeding, you get automatic food production. Tree roots themselves loosen the soil. Fallen leaves create mulch, and symbiotic fungi deliver nutrients. The economics of the system work like compound interest in a bank. The first 3 years, you invest time and money in creating a structure. Over the next 17 years, the system produces a harvest that is many times greater than the initial investment. The 20-year life cycle of a food forest produces food equivalent to the cost of a new car. At the same time, the system does not break down, does not require fuel, and becomes more productive every year. Neuroscience research shows that the brain avoids making decisions without immediate feedback. When you look at a frozen patch of ground in February, your limbic system screams danger. No greenery, no warmth, no visible signs of life. Most people stop at this point. They see bare ground and imagine how they will ruin their neat lawn with meaningless holes. Fear of uncertainty paralyzes action, postponing the project until next year. This emotional barrier costs you an entire year of potential growth. A tree planted in February takes advantage of the cold months to develop its root system. By spring, it already has a powerful underground structure ready for active growth. Commercial nurseries have been getting people used to planting container plants in the spring for years. Beautiful greenery in plastic pots look safe and predictable. Bare roots seem like dead sticks, although they are the ones that take root best. Overcoming the winter barrier requires trust in natural biological processes. The tree does not sleep in winter. It is preparing for the explosion of growth that will occur with the first warmth. A February day in 1998 forever changed my understanding of gardening. I was holding in my hands an Antonovka apple tree with bare roots, which looked like a withered stick with several pathetic shoots. The soil temperature was only 2 degrees above zero. The shovel had difficulty entering the half-frozen ground, making a metallic sound with each blow. The voice in my head, trained by decades of gardening magazines, insisted I wait until May. Every move seemed like a mistake that would destroy the tree. The roots of the tree were cold and hard to the touch, but not dry. Upon closer inspection, the tips had faint white dots of new roots. Life was hidden in what seemed dead. 3 years later, the same tree produced the first apples the size of a walnut. By the 5th year, the harvest amounted to 2 buckets of excellent fruit. Today, 25 years later, it feeds not only my family but also my neighbors. The decision to plant, despite fears and doubts, still bears fruit in the literal sense. Every apple reminds me of the day I chose to take action instead of waiting for perfect conditions. The mathematics of wasted time is merciless in its simplicity. A tree planted this February will produce its first harvest in the 3rd year and will be at full strength by the 5th. A tree planted next February will be forever behind by a full year of production. An apple tree in full fruiting produces from 30 to 50 kilograms of fruit annually. In the store, a kilogram of quality apples costs from $1 to $2.50. One lost year means between $50 and $200 in lost profits from just one tree. Multiply this amount by the 7 trees of the planned food forest. Each year of delay costs between $21 and $700 in lost harvest. Over a decade, this figure reaches $700 in lost profits. Plus, food inflation works against you every day you wait. Prices for quality organic fruits are rising faster than general inflation. A tree planted today will produce products at tomorrow's prices in 10 years. Time cannot be bought or made up in gardening. Biological processes are not accelerated by desire or money. Each lost season is lost forever, taking with it years of future abundance. Robert Hart was the first to popularize the concept of a forest garden in Britain in the 1980s. His multi-tiered agroecosystem on 2 acres produced a greater variety of food than neighboring farms 10 times larger. The secret was to use the 3rd dimension. A natural forest never grows in one plane. Tall trees form a canopy, undergrowth develops under them, and shrubs and grasses spread on the ground. Each tier uses its own portion of sunlight and occupies its own ecological niche. Vertical stacking allows you to place in 6 square meters what would take 18 in a traditional garden. The root systems of different plants work at different depths without competing with each other for nutrients. Microclimate regulation occurs automatically in a multi-tier system. The upper tier creates shade and reduces moisture evaporation. The middle tier protects from the wind. The lower tier retains soil moisture and suppresses weeds. The symbiosis of root systems strengthens the entire ecosystem. The deep roots of trees lift minerals from the lower layers of the soil. The surface roots of shrubs process fallen leaves into nutritious humus. The architecture of a food forest consists of 3 clearly defined levels, each with its own function and ripening time. The system works like a symphony orchestra, with each instrument playing its part in the overall work of abundance. The canopy layer is formed by 3 trees on a semi-dwarf rootstock: apple, pear, and plum. They reach a height of 15 to 20 feet and become the main producers of the system from the 5th year. Their task is to create a structural frame and ensure maximum harvest volume. The understory layer is occupied by 2 trees of medium height, dwarf cherry and hazelnut. They grow up to 10 feet tall and begin to bear fruit in the 2nd or 3rd year. Their role is to fill the middle tier and provide an early return on investment. The ground layer is formed by 2 types of shrubs, currants and gooseberries. They remain at a height of 3 to 5 feet and produce a crop the 1st year after planting. Their function is to provide immediate food production and living mulch for the entire system. 7 plants create a closed ecosystem where waste from one level becomes food for another. Fallen leaves from the upper tier feed the bushes. Their roots loosen the soil for the trees. Selecting the right varieties for the canopy layer determines the success of the entire system for the next 20 years. The Liberty apple tree is genetically resistant to scab and powdery mildew, which eliminates the need for chemical treatment. This variety was bred at Cornell University specifically for organic growing. The conference pear ripens in September and is stored until January in a cool basement. One tree produces from 40 to 60 kilograms of fruit annually after the 5th year of life. The fruits contain natural preservatives that extend their shelf life without special processing. Stanley plum is versatile for fresh consumption and processing. It is self-pollinating, which means a guaranteed harvest even if there are no other plums nearby. The tree begins to bear fruit in the 3rd year and reaches peak productivity in the 7th. Semi-dwarf rootstock is critical for controlling tree size. Standard trees grow up to 40 feet and create a dense canopy that kills everything underneath. Semi-dwarfs remain manageable and allow enough light to reach the lower tiers. The distance between canopy trees should be exactly 16 feet. This creates the perfect balance between maximizing space utilization and preventing competition for sunlight. The dwarf cherry variety. Carmen reaches a maximum height of 8 feet and ideally fills the space between the canopy and the ground. It blooms 2 weeks later than regular cherries, avoiding late spring frosts that destroy the harvest of standard varieties. Hazelnuts serve triple duty in the food forest ecosystem. Its roots form a symbiosis with nitrogen-fixing bacteria, enriching the soil with natural fertilizer. Dense foliage provides a windbreak for more delicate plants. The nuts ripen in September and, if properly stored, are stored until next summer. One mature hazel tree produces 10 to 15 kilograms of nuts annually. In the supermarket, a kilogram of hazelnuts costs from $7 to $15. The undergrowth begins to bear fruit much earlier than the canopy, providing psychological support for the gardener. In the 2nd year, the cherries produce their first handfuls of berries, proving that the system is working. This is critical to maintaining motivation in a long-term project. The middle tier creates a microclimate for terrestrial plants, reducing temperature fluctuations and maintaining soil moisture. In the morning, under the canopy of the undergrowth, dew lasts 2 hours longer than in open space. Currants contain 4 times more vitamin C than oranges, turning the berry crop into a natural pharmacy. Early, sweet red currant ripens in June. Black bensarek bears fruit in July, creating a continuous conveyor of fresh berries for 2 months. Hinamaki red gooseberry is resistant to powdery mildew and produces a harvest in the 1st year after planting. Bushes live up to 30 years and only become more productive with age. One plant produces 3 to 5 kilograms of berries annually. The above-ground layer acts as a living mulch, suppressing weed growth and conserving soil moisture. Research shows that mulching plants reduce the need for watering by up to 50% compared to bare soil. The root system of shrubs works in the upper layers of the soil, without competing with the deep roots of trees. They process fallen leaves into nutritious humus, creating a natural fertilization cycle without external additives. Early returns from berry bushes provide immediate gratification from the project. While the apple trees are still gaining strength, currants and gooseberries are already filling the baskets, proving the correctness of the chosen strategy. The food forest project in the Moscow region suffered a complete collapse in 2005 due to the lack of systematic planning. A permaculture enthusiast planted 23 different types of plants on a 6-acre plot of land without considering their compatibility or space requirements. After 5 years, the site turned into impenetrable thickets, where tall apple trees shaded the cherries to death, nuts crushed the currants, and pears were sick from lack of air circulation. Productivity dropped to zero, and the owner was forced to cut down half of the plantings. Chaotic planting creates competition instead of cooperation between plants. When there is no clear structure of tiers, each plant struggles to survive, depleting the system's resources. The result is exactly the opposite of the intended abundance. The principle of 7 plants eliminates chaos through strict limitation of species diversity. Each plant receives a specific role, space, and time for development. The system becomes predictable and manageable. A structured approach requires the discipline of not making impulse purchases of plants. Each addition to the system must be justified by its function and compatibility with existing elements. Botanical grafting joins 2 different plants into one functional tree. The upper part determines the variety and quality of the fruit. The lower part controls the vigor of growth, resistance to disease, and the depth of the root system. Rootstock selection critically impacts the entire food forest ecosystem. The standard MM111 rootstock produces trees up to 40 feet tall, with roots reaching depths of up to 8 meters. In the food forest, such giants turn into monopolists, seizing all available space and resources for themselves. Semi-dwarf M, 26 rootstock limits tree height to 20 feet and produces a compact root system. This allows sunlight to penetrate to the lower tiers and ensures a balanced development of the entire multi-level system. Research at the East Malling Research Station in England has shown that semi-dwarf trees begin to bear fruit a year earlier than standard ones. At the same time, their yield per unit area is 30% higher due to the possibility of denser planting. The dwarf rootstock M27 is only suitable for container growing and dies quickly in open ground without constant support. Its root system is too weak to establish a long-term food forest ecosystem. Research from Cornell University has shown that the survival rate of bare root trees is 30% higher when planted in winter compared to spring. Cool soil stimulates root development without the stress of simultaneous leaf and shoot growth. Container trees from garden centers sit in artificial environments for months or years. Their roots curl inside the pot, forming a spiral that suffocates the tree after a few years. Transplant shock from changing substrate is often fatal. February planting takes advantage of the natural biological rhythm of plants. The tree is at rest. All life processes are slowed down. The supply of nutrients is concentrated in the roots and trunk. This is the ideal time for a painless transplant. Spring planting coincides with the beginning of active growth, when the tree directs energy into the formation of leaves and shoots. A root system damaged during transplantation cannot provide nutrition to the rapidly growing green mass, which leads to stress and death. Industrial nurseries impose spring planting solely for commercial reasons. Green plants in pots look alive and healthy, making them easier to sell to inexperienced buyers. 3 biological constraints determine the success or failure of a food forest. The first constraint concerns planting time and does not allow for compromise. The dormant period for plants in temperate latitudes lasts from December to March, but the optimal window for planting opens only in February. Soil temperatures in February range from 0 to +4 degrees. It is these conditions that trigger the process of callus formation on damaged roots. New root hairs begin to form in cold, damp soil long before the first leaves appear. The biological mechanism of winter planting is based on the separation of the plant's energy flows. During the dormant period, 80% of the accumulated nutrients are directed to the restoration and growth of the root system. In spring, this proportion is reversed. March is already too late for most Midland regions. The buds begin to swell, sap flow is activated, and the plant wakes up. Damage to the roots during this period causes severe stress and reduces survival rate by up to 50%. January planting is possible only in southern regions with mild winters. В средней полосе промерзшая почва делает посадку технически невозможной без специального оборудования для оттаивания грунта. The second biological limitation concerns the spatial planning of a multi-tiered system. Calculation of distances is based on the projection of mature tree crowns and their need for sunlight for photosynthesis. An error in planning will lead to competition and the death of part of the plantings in 5 years. An apple tree on a semi-dwarf rootstock produces a crown 12 to 15 feet in diameter. The pear reaches a similar size, the plum remains more compact at 10 feet, the triangular arrangement with 16 feet between the centers of the trunks eliminates crown overlap. The underbrush is placed at intervals 8 feet from the nearest canopy tree. Dwarf cherry and hazelnut trees receive enough diffused light penetrating through the foliage of the upper tier. Their root systems work at medium depths, without competing with surface and deep roots. The ground layer occupies the remaining spaces within 4 feet of any woody plant. Currants and gooseberries are tolerant of partial shade and thrive under the protection of taller plants. Their function is to fill all available ecological niches. The mathematical model of plant placement takes into account not only current but also future sizes. The system is designed for a 20-year perspective, when all plants reach their maximum size. The third biological constraint determines the genetic basis of the entire system through the selection of the correct rootstock. The rootstock controls not only the size of the tree, but also the speed of fruiting, disease resistance, and lifespan of the plant. The M26 rootstock was bred in England specifically for intensive gardening and limits the growth of the tree genetically. The root system forms a horizontal structure at a depth of 30 to 60 centimeters, which is ideal for a multi-tiered ecosystem. The compatibility of the rootstock with the scion determines the longevity of the tree. An apple tree on M26 rootstock lives from 25 to 30 years and maintains high productivity throughout the entire period. A pear on the same rootstock can reach the age of 40 years. A weak-growing rootstock accelerates the onset of fruiting by 2 years compared to a vigorous growing rootstock. The tree directs energy to the formation of a crop instead of the endless growth of vegetative mass. This is critical to early returns on food forest investments. Resistance to soil pests is inherent in the genetics of the M26 rootstock. The roots secrete natural repellents that repel wireworms and mole crickets. The system protects itself without the use of chemicals. The first week of February begins the construction of the food forest with the marking of the main structure. The triangle, with its vertices 16 feet apart, would become the skeleton of the entire system for the next 20 years. Each peak marks the location of the future canopy tree: apple, pear, and plum. Dig 3 planting holes twice the size of the intended root ball. The depth should allow the roots to be placed freely without bending upward. Fold the top fertile layer separately from the subsoil. They will be needed in different sequences when backfilling. At the bottom of each hole, lay a drainage layer of broken brick or coarse gravel 10 centimeters thick. On top, add a bucket of mature compost mixed with topsoil. This will create a breeding ground for soil microorganisms that will feed the tree. Mycorrhizal fungi play a key role in tree survival by forming a symbiotic relationship with the root system. Inoculation of soil with special mycorrhizal preparations increases survival rate by 40%. Fungi expand the effective root area tens of times. Prepared holes should sit for a week before planting. The soil will settle, microbiological activity will stabilize, and the temperature will level out. Haste at this stage costs the life of the tree. Bare root trees arrive from the nursery in a state of deep dormancy, packed in damp sawdust or peat. The root system looks lifeless, but when properly treated it shows amazing vitality. Soaking the roots in water for 4 hours awakens cellular activity. Inspect the root system for damage from transportation. Use pruning shears to trim off any broken or damaged roots, leaving a clean cut. Healthy roots are white or light yellow when cut. Dark areas indicate rotting. Form a small mound of topsoil in the center of the hole. Position the tree so that the grafting site is 5 centimeters above the final ground level. Spread the roots evenly along the slopes of the mound, avoiding bends and weaves. Backfilling is done in layers with compaction of each layer. The top fertile layer comes first, then the mixture with compost, and the last is the subsoil. Press down with your foot carefully so as not to damage the delicate roots, but firmly enough to eliminate air pockets. Abundant watering completes planting and starts the rooting process. Pour 20 liters of water under each tree slowly, allowing the moisture to be absorbed gradually. The soil should be wet to the depth of the roots. During the first year, 80% of the tree's growth occurs underground, completely invisible to the gardener. The root system expands in all directions, forming a network of feeding hairs that will determine the tree's productivity for decades to come. The above-ground part may look almost unchanged until midsummer. This misleads beginners and makes them think that the tree has not taken root. На самом деле, растения мудро инвестируют всю энергию в создание мощного фундамента для будущего роста. Watering is required weekly in the absence of natural precipitation. 20 liters of water for each tree provides sufficient moisture for active root formation. Overwatering is just as dangerous as drought, so monitor the condition of the soil at a depth of 10 centimeters. Mulching with straw or wood chips in a 10-centimeter layer creates ideal conditions for soil life. Earthworms actively work under the mulch, structuring the soil and creating channels for air and water. Organic matter gradually decomposes, feeding the roots. By the end of the first season, each tree should produce an increase of 30 to 50 centimeters of new shoots. This is a signal of successful rooting and readiness for the next stage of system development. February of the second year begins a new phase of food forest construction with the addition of a middle layer. Dwarf cherry and hazelnut will occupy intermediate positions between the already established canopy trees, creating a denser, more productive system. Place a dwarf cherry tree, Carmen, 8 feet from the nearest canopy tree. Its compact crown will not compete for sunlight with apple and pear trees, but will receive enough diffused light for normal development. Hazelnut performs a structural function in the ecosystem, creating a protective barrier from the winds and forming a favorable microclimate. Its deep roots extract minerals from the lower layers of the soil, enriching the surface horizons through falling leaves. Planting techniques remain identical to the first stage: digging holes, drainage, composting, proper placement, and abundant watering. The first year's experience gives you confidence in the procedure and an understanding of the soil's reaction to your actions. By the summer of the second year, the system begins to acquire the recognizable features of a multi-tiered forest. Canopy trees give active growth, the middle tier takes root, and the total biomass of the site increases significantly. The ecosystem is gaining critical mass for self-sustaining. The dopamine reinforcement effect explains the critical importance of early harvests in long-term projects. When the dwarf cherry tree produces its first handful of berries in its second year, the brain receives a chemical reward that reinforces the motivation to continue the 20-year project. Without early payoff, most gardeners lose interest in the system and abandon it in the third or fourth year. Human psychology is poorly suited for investments without visible intermediate results. Cherries become proof of the correctness of the chosen strategy. The first hazelnut harvest appears in the third year in the form of several dozen nuts. Their nutritional value and high market value create a sense of real economic benefit from the project. The system ceases to seem like an abstraction and becomes a source of food. The psychological victory of an early harvest motivates to complete the construction of the system by adding a ground layer. Visible results make the future promises of the system more credible and encourage investment of time and effort in the final stage. Each berry collected works as positive reinforcement for long-term thinking. The brain begins to associate gardening not with hard work, but with pleasure, which radically changes the attitude towards the process. February of the third year completes the food forest architecture with the addition of a ground layer of currants and gooseberries. These hardy shrubs will fill remaining ecological niches and create a living mulch under the canopy of the emerging forest. Red currants, early sweet, and Bensarek black currants are placed in spaces between trees 4 feet apart. Their root system works in the surface layers of the soil, without competing with the deep roots of apple and pear trees. Hinomaki red gooseberry has a compact habit and high resistance to powdery mildew. Thorns on the shoots create natural protection against rodents for the entire system, especially important in winter, when mice can damage the bark of young trees. Planting shrubs is easier than trees due to their less developed root system. The holes are dug to a depth of 40 centimeters, filled with compost and mulched after planting. The survival rate of shrubs approaches 100% if planting dates are observed. By the summer of the third year, currants produce the first significant harvests of berries. Gooseberries form powerful bushes ready for fruiting. The ground layer quickly achieves productivity and begins to recoup the investment in the system. The fifth year becomes a turning point in the life of the food forest, when all three tiers begin to work synchronously. Apple and pear trees produce the first serious harvests of 10 to 20 kilograms per tree. The middle tier comes into full strength, and ground shrubs reach maximum productivity. The ripening timeline stretches from June to October, providing a continuous conveyor belt of fresh fruit. Currants open the season in mid-June, gooseberries ripen in July, cherries produce a harvest in August, apples and pears finish the season in September to October. The total yield of a system of 7 plants in the fifth year ranges from 150 to 200 kilograms of a variety of fruits and nuts. In monetary terms, this is equivalent to $100 to $300 of quality organic products at current prices. The ecosystem becomes self-sustaining and requires minimal human intervention. Fallen leaves form a natural mulch. The roots of different plants exchange nutrients through the mycorrhizal network, and biological balance suppresses pests. The system continues to increase productivity until the 10th year of life, when it reaches its peak yield. A mature food forest produces up to 300 kilograms of food annually with minimal labor and resources. Bill Mollison, founder of Permaculture, defined systems design as the art of creating sustainable human settlements through the imitation of natural ecosystems. The person who built the food forest masters this art in practice and moves from consumer to creative thinking. An abundance architect sees a plot of land not as a flat surface for placing plants, but as a three-dimensional space for creating multifunctional ecosystems. Each element of the system performs several functions. Each function is provided by several elements. Thinking is shifting from short-term crop planning to long-term landscape design. Decisions are made taking into account their impact on the system in 10, 20, 30 years. Every action is evaluated through the lens of sustainability and self-sustainability. The transition is complete when the gardener begins to see opportunities to create similar systems all around him. An empty plot becomes a potential food forest. An abandoned garden becomes an object for reconstruction into a multi-tiered ecosystem. Knowledge of the principles of vertical stacking and consistent development makes a person independent of external advice and ready-made solutions. He is able to adapt the system to any conditions and restrictions. The initial investment to create a food forest ranges from $12 to $180 in 3 years. This includes bare root seedlings, compost, mulch, basic tools, and mycorrhizal preparations. The main costs occur in the first 2 years of system construction. The average price of quality organic apples in supermarkets is $1.50 per kilogram. Pears cost up to $2, cherries $3, currants $4, gooseberries $3.50 per kilogram. Hazelnuts reach $8 per kilogram. A mature food forest produces annually about 50 kilograms of apples, 30 kilograms of pears, 15 kilograms of cherries, 20 kilograms of currants, 10 kilograms of gooseberries, and 5 kilograms of nuts. The total value of the crop exceeds $400. The return on investment reaches 200% per annum after the system reaches full productivity. Considering the 20-year service life of the plantings, the total profit exceeds the initial investment by 30 times, without taking into account food inflation. Food inflation works in favor of the food forest owner, increasing the cost of production faster than the overall price increase. Over the past 10 years, prices for organic fruits have increased 2.5 times. Research from the Royal Horticultural Society in London has shown that regular gardening reduces cortisol levels in the blood by 30% and improves sleep quality. Working with the earth activates the production of serotonin, a natural antidepressant, creating lasting psychological well-being. Food security is measured not only by the quantity of food, but also by the control over its production. The owner of a food forest knows exactly what fertilizers were used when the crop was harvested and how the fruit was stored. Full transparency of the food chain eliminates the risks of industrial production. A freshly picked apple contains the maximum concentration of vitamins and antioxidants, which decreases by 50% during the first week of storage. Store-bought fruit loses most of its nutritional value during transportation and storage. Resilience to food crises becomes critical in the face of climate change and geopolitical instability. The food forest provides the family with a significant portion of the fruit, regardless of external supplies and price fluctuations. The educational value of the system for children cannot be overstated. They observe the complete growth cycle of plants, understand the connection between work and results, and develop responsibility and long-term thinking through daily care of the ecosystem. Climatic zones 5 to 8 cover most of the territory of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic countries. The principles of a multi-story food forest remain universal, but specific varieties and planting dates are adapted to local conditions. In the 5th zone, with frosts down to -29 degrees, choose especially winter-hardy varieties. Antonovka apple tree, Lada pear tree, and Skoroplodnaya plum tree can withstand extreme temperatures without damage. Shift planting to the end of February, when the peak of cold weather has passed. The 6th zone allows the use of a wider range of varieties, including European selections. Melba apple tree, Conference pear tree, and Venjerka plum tree are adapted to moderately cold winters and show excellent productivity. The 7th zone opens up opportunities for growing semi-heat-loving crops. Actinidia colomicta can be added to the undergrowth for a variety of vitamin products. Planting dates are shifted to the first half of February. The 8th zone, with mild winters, makes it possible to include figs and grapes in the system as elements of the upper and middle tiers. The planting season begins in January. The duration of the growing season increases by a month. A successful food forest project in the city of Białystok in eastern Poland is shattering the myth that multi-tiered gardening is impossible in cold climates. With an average January temperature of -5 degrees, the 9-plant system produces up to 200 kilograms of fruit annually. Canadian farmer Martin Crawford has created a 6-layer agroforestry system in the province of Nova Scotia, where winter temperatures reach -30 degrees. His forest has fed a family of 4 with fresh fruit from May to November for 15 years. The key to success in cold regions is to create a protected microclimate through dense planting. The multi-tiered structure accumulates heat during the day and slowly releases it at night, raising the average temperature of the area by 2 to 3 degrees. Snow cover acts as a natural insulation for the root system, preventing the soil from freezing to the root depth. Mulching enhances this effect by creating an additional heat-insulating layer. Geography does not determine the possibility of creating a food forest. It determines the willingness to adapt the system to local conditions. The principles work wherever it is possible to grow fruit trees, that is, in almost the entire inhabited territory of temperate latitudes. The Petrov family from the Tula region planted their food forest in February 2010, following exactly this system. Today, their 6-acre plot feeds not only their family, but also brings in additional income from selling surplus crops to neighbors. Andrei Sokolov from the Moscow region started with 3 apple trees in 2015 and gradually expanded the system to a full-fledged food forest. His children have grown up helping to care for the trees and now plan to create their own systems in new areas. Every day of delay pushes the moment of food independence 1 year further. Biological time cannot be accelerated by money or technology. A tree not planted this February will never bear fruit in 2027. The transition from consumer to creative thinking begins with the first shovel of earth thrown out of the planting hole. At this moment, you cease to be a hostage to the product system and become its creator. If you're willing to think in terms of decades instead of seasons, if you're willing to invest in your children's future instead of short-term conveniences, grab a shovel and start digging. Your food forest is waiting, and every day lost is a year of harvest lost, never to be regained.